He hadn't shown up that morning on Veterans Day of all days. I'm Maya, 24, waitress at a Vermont diner where the coffee's bitter and the heating hums like an old truck. His booth sat untouched, just a cold cup dry toast, and that same faded handkerchief folded like a secret. Ever had someone disappear just when you were about to say thank you? Every morning at 7:02 a.m., Walter Jennings arrives with a worn briefcase and a precise nod. The bell above the diner door jingled with its usual clink, and Maya glanced up from her station beside the coffee pots. Walter Jennings, punctual as the sunrise, stepped inside with the same careful cadence he always used. Measured quiet, a man who had long ago learned how to take up as little space as possible while still commanding attention. He wore his brown wool coat, buttoned all the way up despite the heated diner. His briefcase, its leather worn and frayed at the corners, dangled from his left hand. Maya smiled and nodded. "Morning, Mr. Jennings," she said gently, gesturing to the his corner booth. Walter gave his precise nod. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," he murmured, voice just above a whisper. He slid into the booth with practiced ease, placing his briefcase on the inside seat, before folding his napkin and smoothing it with 3 deliberate strokes. Kyle, who was wiping down the counter nearby, watched with narrowed eyes. "You'd think he was performing surgery with that napkin," he muttered. Maya shot him a sideways look. "Respect, Kyle. You don't know his story." "I know he tips in nickels and dimes," the teenager grumbled, but quieted when Ruby poked her head out of the kitchen. "He's tipped you better than anyone, son," she barked, not unkindly. Her voice was gravel wrapped in a doily. The morning light slanted in through the blinds, catching dust motes mid-air as the aroma of sizzling bacon drifted from the back. The diner, nestled on a bend in Main Street in Montpelier, Vermont, was still slow at this hour. Outside, red and gold leaves danced in the breeze, clinging stubbornly to the last branches before the snow arrived. Maya poured Walter his usual black coffee, 1 sugar. She set the mug down quietly, placing the sugar packet next to it as he liked. "You want the breakfast combo today?" she asked. Walter didn't look up. "Yes, thank you." She walked away, but not before noticing his right hand tremble as he reached for the sugar. Just the faintest shake, but it was there. He spilled a small stream of orange juice onto the table once his food arrived, and Maya returned with a cloth, pretending to wipe a broader area so it wouldn't seem like she noticed. Walter mumbled an apology, but she only smiled and said, "Happens to the best of us." Back at the counter, Kyle scrubbed a stubborn spot on a plate. "Is he always like that? Like what? Quiet? Precise? Like he's waiting for something?" Maya glanced at Walter, who was scribbling something into a tiny, battered notebook beside his plate. "Maybe he is," she said softly. "Or maybe he already found it and just doesn't want to let go." Kyle frowned. "That sounds deep for a Tuesday morning." She laughed gently. "You'll get used to Tuesdays." Walter finished his meal, slowly placing his knife and fork parallel on the plate. He counted coins from his pocket and arranged them neatly beside the check, 3 quarters, 2 dimes, a nickel. 15% exact. When he stood, he tucked the notebook back into his coat, picked up his briefcase, and paused on the way out. By the bulletin board near the entrance, he stood still. Maya watched as his gaze settled on a faded photograph pinned in the corner, a black and white snapshot of a military parade from decades past. Young soldiers marching under bunting and confetti. Walter lingered a moment longer, then stepped out into the chill. Kyle whistled low. "Think he was in that photo?" "Wouldn't surprise me," Maya said. She walked over to his booth, damp cloth in hand. As she wiped, she noticed she was moving slower than usual, tracing the faint ring his cup had left on the table. "Radio says flurries tonight," Ruby called from the kitchen, humming Moon River as she folded napkins one by one. Great, Kyle said. Another reason to freeze on my walk home. As Kyle bent to collect the dishes, something caught his eye. A curled edge of newsprint peeked out from beneath the plate. He lifted it carefully and held it up to the light. It was brittle and yellowed, a newspaper clipping cut cleanly folded once. He read aloud, squinting, "Local hero awarded Bronze Star in 1969. Kyle never noticed how quiet Walter's corner got, until that morning he tried to fill it with jokes. The snow had started sometime after dawn, a soft dusting that clung to the window panes and turned the world outside into a blur of white. Inside Pinecone Diner, the hum of the coffee maker and the sizzle from the griddle created a cozy rhythm. The windows fogged with steam and breath, and the scent of bacon and maple syrup danced in the air. Kyle's sleeves rolled and apron slightly askew strutted toward Walter's booth with a pair of eggs over easy. 2 over no surprises, he announced in a mock radio voice. Standard rations for the brave veteran of breakfast wars. No response. Walter didn't even lift his eyes from the creased pages of his notebook. He sat as always, a lone coat folded neatly beside him, briefcase tucked close, silence wrapped around him, like another layer. Kyle cleared his throat, undeterred. I read somewhere that eating the same thing every day keeps you young. So I'm guessing you're about 27 inside, huh? Still nothing. Just the faint squeak of pen on paper. Kyle backed off, retreating to the counter where Maya was arranging a bowl of bright red poppy pins beside the register. A paper flyer flapped gently on the door behind her Veterans Day breakfast. Nov 11. You ever wonder if he's deaf? Kyle asked. Maya glanced up, her expression unreadable. No. He hears plenty. Okay, but he never laughs. Or talks much. It's like trying to joke with a statue. She gave a small shake of her head and smoothed a napkin into a triangle. Not all wounds show. Kyle leaned on the counter, eyebrows raised. You always defend him. I recognize him, she said quietly. Her voice like wool warmed near the fire. My dad used to sit just like that. Same silence. Same look that says he's still somewhere else. Kyle blinked. Your dad? She nodded. Army medic. Vietnam. He made it back with a body, but not all of his mind. After I started nursing school, I saw the pieces missing in him. I thought I could help, but he didn't want help. Not from me. He watched her for a beat. So you quit nursing. I quit everything for a while, she admitted. I needed to find kindness again. Kyle's gaze drifted back to the booth. Walter was lifting his coffee cup with that same steady grace, but Kyle noticed the tremor, now barely there, but insistent. And the quiet wasn't just silence, it was presence. Solid, weighted. Walter stood up earlier than usual that morning, leaving behind his usual tip in coins and a small plate wiped clean. As he buttoned his coat, Maya nodded at him, and he returned it with his customary brevity. But as he turned to leave, something slipped from his coat pocket, a pale square of cloth, half folded. Neither Maya nor Ruby seemed to notice as they busied themselves with preparing for the coming breakfast rush. Kyle stepped over, picked it up. A handkerchief. Soft cotton worn thin with age. On one corner the threads had been stitched with delicate care, an insignia of wings, a sword, and the numbers 173rd. Later, after his shift and a lecture from Ruby about proper mop technique, Kyle tucked himself into bed with his phone. His fingers flew over the screen. 173rd Airborne Brigade, he typed. A cascade of images appeared, soldiers dropping into jungles, names carved into stone, citations and medals. He read on. His thumb hovered as he tapped deeper into an old archive site, a page about valor and sacrifice. He didn't notice the hour slipping past midnight, or the snow thickening on his windowsill. His phone screen glowed as he whispered the words aloud, Bronze Star, awarded for heroic service. Some truths don't knock, they fall from pockets and change everything. The first real snow of the season crept in quietly overnight, blanketing Montpellier in soft silence. Sidewalks were no longer crisp with fallen leaves, but muffled under a fresh crust of white. Boots thudded heavier coats came in damp, and the bell over Pinecone Diner's door jingled with each customer shaking off slush. Inside, the air was spiced with cinnamon from morning buns Ruby had baked before dawn. Coffee steamed on every table, fogging glasses and warming hands. The radio behind the counter murmured, "And don't forget, the town square will host the annual Veterans Day ceremony this Saturday." At 7:02 sharp, Walter Jennings pushed open the door, stamped his boots twice on the mat, and walked in with the same quiet purpose as always. His brown wool coat bore a dusting of snow, and his gloved hands clutched the worn briefcase close to his ribs. Maya met his eyes with a small smile. "Morning, Mr. Jennings." Walter gave a slight nod. "Morning, Miss Thompson." He made his way to his usual booth by the window, the one with the best view of Main Street, though today the snow blurred outlines and softened the world beyond the glass. Kyle peeked out from the kitchen pass-through, nodding but not saying much. He'd been quieter lately, ever since he'd read up on the 173rd Airborne. His notebook lay in his apron pocket, corners frayed the beginnings of a sketch pressed between pages, a folded flag, a pair of worn boots, a name in careful block letters. Walter Jennings. Maya poured Walter's coffee, the mug warming her palm. "Extra cream today." "Half a packet of sugar," he murmured, always precise. She turned to fetch it. Walter reached into his coat for his wallet, fingers patting down pockets, then stilling. A soft thud under the table cut through the low hum of the diner. Something had fallen. Maya leaned down instinctively. A small box, metallic no bigger than a pill case, lay near the base of the table. She picked it up, ready to hand it over, thinking maybe it was a mint tin or maybe medication. But when she flipped it open, her breath caught. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, was a medal. Bronze star-shaped with a red, white, blue ribbon folded underneath. A bronze star. Its shine dulled only slightly by age, but unmistakable. The clatter of forks stopped. Ruby looked up from the kitchen. A man near the register leaned over his coffee, squinting. "I served," he muttered. "Never saw one of those up close." Walter looked stricken. Not panicked, just deeply painfully uncomfortable. "Please," he said, reaching for the box, voice rougher than usual. "It's nothing. Just something from a long time ago," but Maya's hands didn't move right away. Her eyes held his. Then gently, she closed the box and placed it on the table before him. Walter's cheeks reddened. He tucked the medal back into his coat, eyes downcast. Kyle emerged from the back. He'd heard everything. He walked up, wiping his hands on his apron, and looked around the room before stopping beside Walter's booth. "I looked it up," he said, voice quiet but carrying. "You saved lives. That's not just something." The silence that followed was reverent, not awkward. Respectful, not pitiful. Ruby bustled over with a plate, bacon, scrambled eggs, and pancakes that glistened with butter. She set it down in front of Walter without a word. "No charge," she said simply. Walter blinked. "You don't have to do that." Maya stepped in, her voice soft but unwavering. "And you didn't have to do what you did either, Mr. Jennings." Walter didn't show up that morning. For the first time in 23 days. Kyle stared at the booth, coffee pot in hand, steam rising like a silent question. The corner where Walter always sat seemed colder, heavier, as if the absence itself had weight. Outside, wind battered the windows, with flecks of snow dancing like restless spirits against the glass. "He's probably just late," Kyle said too loudly, his voice bouncing off the linoleum and chrome. Maya folded a napkin with more precision than usual. "He's never late," she murmured. Ruby hunched at the register, looked up slowly. "He never missed a Friday since 2019. Not even during that nor'easter 2 years ago. You remember, Maya? We had to serve folks by flashlight." Kyle set down the pot. "You've got to be kidding." "I wish I was," Ruby said. "He came in, ordered oatmeal, and tipped exact change. Like always." The bell above the diner door jangled as a gust of wind swept in a handful of dead leaves. Maya shivered and crossed her arms. Kyle bit his lip. "I think we should check on him," he said. Maya hesitated. "That's not our place." "Isn't it?" Kyle asked. "Didn't you say kindness counts more than permission?" She looked at him, startled. "I said that last week, after I made that dumb joke about old-timers." Ruby pulled open the reservation book from behind the counter. He never gave an address, but he did write it down once for a pie delivery apple crumb. Page 13. Kyle flipped the book open. Scribbled in faint pen was a line W. "Jennings, 42 Juniper Hollow Rodeo." "Let's go," he said. Maya hesitated again, her thumb brushing the red poppy pinned to her apron. Then she nodded. Juniper Hollow Road curved like a ribbon into the woods trees weighed down by fresh snow. The little log house stood near the end roof, capped in white smoke, absent from the chimney. The mailbox leaned forward, as if trying to whisper something. They climbed the porch steps. Kyle knocked. No answer. The doorknob turned easily. Maya began. "I know, but something's wrong." Inside, the house smelled like old pine and ashes. A half-empty cup of tea sat on the side table. On the mantel above the fireplace, photographs in wooden frames leaned slightly askew. Most were black and white men in uniform, a woman in a 60s beehive, a dog with one ear flopped. Walter sat in a faded armchair by the window, eyes closed. For a terrifying second, Maya thought he was gone, but then his chest rose. "Slow, shallow. Mr. Jennings," she whispered. He opened one eye. "You came." Maya kneeled beside him. "You scared us." "I didn't mean to." The room was cold. Kyle crossed to the heater, twisted the dial. Nothing. "Out of oil?" he asked. Walter didn't answer. He was looking at the snow beyond the window. Maya rose and drifted into the small kitchen. The cupboards were neat. She found a kettle, filled it, lit the old gas stove. The hiss and tick before the flame caught felt like breath returning to a still room. Back in the living room, Walter spoke without prompting. "It was 1968. Laos, technically, though we weren't supposed to be there." His voice was brittle. "We were ambushed. I dragged Lieutenant Harper back to the med tent 2 miles under fire. He didn't make it." Kyle sat slowly on the armrest of the couch. "But you saved him." Walter shook his head. "I carried a body. They gave me a medal. Said I showed bravery. What I remember is the smell of burning trees and screaming. The real heroes never came home." Maya returned with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She'd found peppermint sticks and stirred one into each. The scent curled around the room like comfort. Walter stared into the mug she placed into his hands. "Why did you hide it?" Maya asked. His eyes didn't lift from the steam. "Because medals are lighter than guilt." The fire in the stove crackled faintly as it caught. Outside, snow fell in silent curtains. Inside, 3 people sat without speaking for a long while, letting the warmth return inch by inch. Kyle picked up a frame that had fallen sideways on the floor. It held a black and white photo of a young man in uniform barely out of boyhood. A scribbled note in the corner read, "To WJ. See you when the shooting stops, H." He handed it to Walter, who pressed it to his chest without a word. Maya reached into a cupboard and found a woolen blanket, draped it over Walter's knees. The old man closed his eyes again, but this time he smiled. Saturday dawned cold and bright. Veterans Day. And the corner booth was empty again. Outside, Montpelier shimmered under a blanket of fresh snow. Flags fluttered from lampposts on Main Street, and distant drums signaled the start of the parade. But inside the Pinecone Diner, the world moved slower, gentler. The bell above the door jingled as Kyle entered, his cheeks pink from the cold. Maya was already there, her navy sweater crisp and a bright red poppy pinned above her heart. Ruby looked up from behind the counter, raising a brow. "You're early. What happened? The parade too cheerful for you?" Maya smiled faintly. "Let's do something small, but real." By 8 o'clock, the diner was warm with the scent of cinnamon rolls and bacon. Maya had placed small American flags along the windowsills while Kyle quietly taped a printed sheet beside the specials board. It was a brief biography of Walter Jennings, adapted from the aging newspaper article they'd found. The headline, "Local Hero Awarded Bronze Star in 1969, was bold at the top. Below it, a few lines in Kyle's handwriting explained what the medal meant. "I thought people should know," Kyle muttered, brushing imaginary dust off the paper. "People will," Maya replied softly. The corner booth remained untouched, but not unnoticed. Ruby had set a half-filled cup of black coffee on the table. Beside it sat a single slice of dry toast and a neat stack of quarters, nickels, and dimes, exactly 15% of a modest breakfast bill. At 9:15, a group of regulars filtered in, still bundled in scarves and coats. One man paused near the booth and murmured, "That's Jennings, Charlie Company." His voice carried weight like he was reciting scripture. Maya nodded at a girl near the jukebox, no older than 9, her curly hair tied back with a ribbon. Her grandfather urged her forward gently. She stepped to the center of the room with a slip of paper in hand and cleared her throat. "My name is Ellie. I'm going to read something I wrote in class. It's called For the Brave." The diner fell silent. Even the sizzle from the griddle in the kitchen seemed to hush. For those who marched when no one watched. For boots that left and never returned. For medals hidden in drawers and hearts that never stopped aching, we remember you. Not in speeches, in silence. Not in parades, in poppies. Ellie's voice was high but steady. When she finished, she folded the paper and looked to her grandfather. The room remained still for one heartbeat, too, and then, without a word spoken, every person stood. No signal, no instruction, just a quiet, collective rising, like the memory of a ritual they hadn't realized they'd forgotten. Kyle stood beside Maya, his hands by his sides, shoulders squared. Ruby stayed behind the counter, lips pressed together, eyes shining. Then the bell rang. It wasn't loud, just the usual chime of a diner door. But in the stillness, it felt monumental. Walter Jennings stepped inside, brushing snow from his old coat. A navy cap with faded embroidery clung to his head. He stopped just past the threshold, taking in the sight, the standing customers, the untouched booth, the half cup of coffee. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, voice gravel soft. A man near the door took off his hat. "Welcome home, brother." Ruby sniffed. "You're late. Your booth's cold." Walter chuckled once, just once, and nodded in Maya's direction. Her smile wavered under the wet gleam in her eyes, and the diner exhaled warm again. A week later, a small plaque appeared above the corner booth. Vermont had given itself over fully to winter. Snow-capped rooftops and softened sidewalks. The maple trees had long since shed their red-gold coats, now replaced by frosted limbs reaching into gray skies. The Pinecone Diner, tucked between a hardware store and the town's post office, had hung a handmade sign in its front window. That morning closed for gratitude. Back in 2 hours. Inside, Maya stood on a step stool with a screwdriver in hand, affixing a simple brass plaque to the wood paneling, just above booth number 4. The letters were etched deep and clean, in honor of Walter Jennings. Booth number 4. No ranks, no dates, just his name and the weight of all that came with it. She stepped down and looked at her work. Ruby watched from the counter, arms crossed over her apron, eyes glinting but saying nothing. Walter arrived at exactly 9:02 a.m., as if nothing had changed. But his coat looked newer, his gait surer. He paused at the door, nodding once toward the sign, then made his way to his booth. Maya and Ruby exchanged glances, no words, just knowing. Kyle came in minutes later, winded from jogging the last block. He carried a small box which he placed on the counter before walking over to Walter. "Sir," he said, quieter than usual, "I wanted to say thanks." Walter raised an eyebrow. Kyle held out a square of cloth. "You gave me this," he said, referring to the embroidered handkerchief folded in his pocket. "Now I've got something for you." From the box, he retrieved a small laminated sheet. It was his college essay. Title: Quiet Courage. The first paragraph started with a description of a man who ordered dry toast and tipped in change. Walter read silently for a long moment, then placed the sheet down and slid the handkerchief across the table toward Kyle. "Booth's yours, kid. Always was." Maya returned from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She passed Walter a sealed envelope. It came yesterday, from Vermont Nursing College. He opened it slowly, pulling out a neatly folded application. "You reapplied," he said softly. Maya nodded. "For the volunteer program, just weekends." Walter held the paper like it was more fragile than any metal. "That's braver than anything I ever did," he murmured. Customers began trickling in once the closed sign was flipped back. They moved more gently than usual, as if the diner had taken on some sacred air. One by one they passed booth number 4, brushing a hand along the bench or nodding toward Walter. A toddler in pink boots waved. Walter waved back. Kyle slid into the opposite side of the booth. "Mind if I join you today?" Walter didn't hesitate. "Booth's yours, kid." Maya wiped down the counter, sneaking glances. On the shelf behind her, a glass jar of peppermint candies sparkled next to a flip calendar permanently turned to December 1969. The radio hummed low with Frank Sinatra crooning, "Have yourself a merry little Christmas." Ruby served up pancakes and muttered, "Try not to spill syrup on your essay, Romeo." Laughter rose from booth number 4. Not the chuckle of polite company, but a genuine cackle as Walter launched into a story about a night in '68 involving a raccoon, a jeep, and a terrified general. Ruby doubled over, and Maya leaned against the wall, tears of laughter streaking down her cheeks. And then quiet again. Maya walked over to the community board near the front. From her apron, she pulled a small Christmas card and pinned it neatly beside the holiday specials. To our quiet hero, the card read in her looping script, "Thank you for the warmth inside and out." Even after the snow settled and the parades faded, the little plaque above booth number 4 still gleamed quietly in the morning light. It reminded folks that some stories are stitched not in headlines or uniforms, but in gestures too humble to name. Kindness, after all, doesn't wear medals. And when we stop judging the silence of others, we might just hear the echoes of their quiet courage. So maybe today, in your own corner of the world, take a moment. A kind word, a warm plate, or simply listening might be the tribute someone's been waiting for.